A David beats Goliath moment, upending the political order in New York and the nation.
I cannot believe these numbers right now.
A political unknown, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, stunning 10-term Congressman Joe Crowley of Queens in the 2018 Democratic primary. Crowley, the House Democratic Caucus chair, and a potential heir to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. With his defeat, a leadership role opened, and another New Yorker, Brooklyn Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, stepped up to fill it.
And the conversation sounded like, look, we have a one-in-a-lifetime talent among us. Let's realize that. Let's nourish that, and let's push it forward.
An ally, Queens Congressman Gregory Meeks, helped to make the case for Jeffries with fellow Democrats.
Morning, everyone.
Jeffries won the job, and 4 years later, he made history, becoming, earlier this month, the first black person to head a major party in Congress, succeeding Pelosi as the top House Democrat.
The office that I hold right now was Tip O'Neill's office.
Really? This was just a few weeks ago, as Jeffries was settling into his new office off the House floor. Just down the hall, a portrait of George Washington. Jeffries said he doubts the first president could have imagined a Congress this diverse.
He probably also couldn't imagine a man like you in this position.
Probably not.
Jeffries' rise to power is also remarkable for how fast it happened. He entered Congress only 10 years ago. His ascent, part of a generational change in Democratic leadership. That change underscored by Jeffries' public embrace of hip-hop, from rapping at a fundraiser to quoting fellow Brooklyn native Biggie Smalls in the first impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump.
And if you don't know, now you know.
Jeffries says his favorite hip-hop song, Biggie's Sky's the Limit, strikes a chord with him.
It tracks sort of his very humble beginnings as a young person growing up in the 80s or early 90s in a tough part of Brooklyn, never possibly imagining that he would emerge as an international hip-hop superstar. He's very reflective on his journey and also inspirational in suggesting to others that the sky's the limit for them as well.
It sounds like that resonates personally with you.
Well, I think that a lot that Biggie Smalls has done resonates personally with me.
Jeffries was raised by working-class parents in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, as the neighborhood was wrestling with the crack cocaine epidemic.
That was a different time, a different era, a different level of danger that was ever present and helped to shape the psychology of people who were living in New York at the time.
He graduated from Midwood High, SUNY Binghamton, a master's program at Georgetown, and then NYU Law School.
This is the photo in the year that Hakeem was in the clinic, and there he is in the middle.
Professor Randy Hertz was serving as a guest judge in a mock court when he first encountered Jeffries.
He was brilliant. It was striking. He was doing things and thinking about things that experienced lawyers generally don't get, and he was figuring it all out as a second-year student.
Law school classmate Patrick Michelle remembers Jeffries being very passionate when students talked about anything from world events to Supreme Court decisions.
He's sort of futuristic in many ways. He's sort of thinking about what does the world need to look like a year, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Jeffries spoke at his convocation, telling fellow grads that a lot of good needs to be done in the world. He clerked for a federal judge in Manhattan and entered corporate law. Jeffries' time at the firm Paul Weiss briefly overlapping with that of future Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson.
He may well have made partner had he decided to make this firm a career, but he saw his calling elsewhere, and I think the country is better off for it.
That calling was public office, but his first attempts to get elected
You are out of touch.
would prove less than successful.
There's a hip-hop song, Every Day I'm Hustling.
Hakeem Jeffries has enjoyed a meteoric rise in Congress, vaulting from freshman backbencher to House Democratic leader in 10 short years.
The D in Democrat stands for deliver.
But his initial plunge into politics was anything but promising.
You've had the floor for a little while.
Hakeem,
let me also say,
At the time, he was a corporate lawyer looking to make a move. Jeffries twice ran primary campaigns against longtime Assemblyman Roger Green of Brooklyn, the first when he was just 29 years old.
you are out of touch.
Jeffries argued Green was no longer responsive to his constituents.
How did you evaluate him as a first-time candidate?
I thought he was very good, yeah. And I had other primaries in the past, but no one was as prepared as Hakeem was, you know. There was no performance art.
Green survived both challenges, but he says Jeffries left an impression.
I remember after one of the campaigns, we said we need to sit down and take account of the critique that he raised against us, and we pulled the staff together, and I think as a result of that, he made me stronger.
When an assembly seat opened in 2006, Jeffries ran a third time and won. He'd go on to be re-elected 2 more times.
It's important to be able to learn from that experience, be knocked down, but not necessarily be knocked out.
In Albany, allies say he was a must-watch during floor debates. Speaker Carl Hastie bonded with Jeffries over their shared love of hip-hop.
Sometimes people have like that it factor. You know, Hakeem just has that it factor.
Manhattan Assemblyman Daniel O'Donnell remembers Jeffries being supportive when O'Donnell hit an awkward patch in his career. What's he like when the lights aren't shining?
That's the key. He's the same. And that's the gift.
In 2012, Jeffries saw another opportunity, setting his sights on Congress. Once again, mounting an insurgent campaign, this time taking on another longtime incumbent, 30-year Congressman Ed Towns. Towns bowed out, but endorsed Jeffries' Democratic primary opponent, Firebrand Councilman Charles Barron. Towns now says he did not like that the Brooklyn Democratic chairman was backing Jeffries.
As long as you're supported by Vito Lopez, I will not support you in spite of all the things that I think that you can bring to the district and what you'll be able to do.
Jeffries easily won the primary and the November general election. Once on Capitol Hill, he landed a seat on the high-profile House Judiciary Committee, where he advocated for reforming the criminal justice system and modernizing copyright laws. Republican Bob Goodlatte chaired the committee.
I always found that he was someone that you could disagree with without getting into a disagreeable situation, if you will.
In 2020, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gave Jeffries a high-profile role on the national stage, naming him a manager in the first impeachment trial of President Donald Trump. The assignment solidifying Jeffries' standing as a congressman to watch.
In a perfect call, the president would not solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election.
At the same time, he was climbing the leadership ladder, starting as a co-chair of the Democrats' messaging arm, then winning a race for caucus chair, succeeding Joe Crawley of Queens, who failed to win re-election. These roles allowed Jeffries to bond with members across the diverse caucus.
For everything, there is a season.
So when Nancy Pelosi announced in November she would step away from leadership to make way for a new generation, Jeffries was ready.
It's an honor to stand before you today.
He was elected to replace her unopposed.
People seem to be surprised about the smoothness of this transition, but there's nothing surprising about it. It was all laid in place, and there was never any question.
Back home in Brooklyn, former Congressman Towns is impressed by Jeffries' rise. Even more so, he says, due to the seniority system so important in Congress.
For him to be able to climb over folks that have been there 20 years, 25 years, and to be able to accomplish this goal, that is not easy.
And yet Jeffries had done it, paving a historic path from working-class Brooklyn to congressional leader, positioning himself to become Speaker if Democrats take back the House.
It's just a great thing to see a young man grow up in our community and get to that point in life.
Like Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Beverly Brooks Kirkland lives in Brooklyn and attends Cornerstone Baptist Church, where Jeffries has been a lifelong member. Her excitement over Jeffries becoming the first person of color to lead a major party in Congress is not just about local or racial pride. It's also about this community having a powerful voice in Washington.
I'm happy for him. I'm happy for us.
These Brooklyn streets help to shape Jeffries, his politics, and the issues he champions. His district carves a U through the borough, Coney Island at one end, Bed-Stuy at the other. It's home to both Tony Brownstone neighborhoods and sprawling public housing developments. Jeffries grew up in nearby Crown Heights as crack cocaine use surged. And then, while in law school, he worked at a legal clinic, helping young people from Brooklyn in trouble with the law.
We were handling cases in the very community that he grew up in and neighboring communities. And he showed innate empathy for the people in the community and the kinds of things that caused people to get involved in the criminal legal system and made it so hard for them to succeed.
These experiences, Jeffries says, led him to focus on criminal justice reform in the state assembly and later in Congress.
I think over time it did inform that if I had the opportunity to go into the practice of law or eventually public service, that I wanted to do something about the broken criminal justice system that clearly existed, the mass incarceration, and the prison industrial complex.
In Albany, Jeffries helped to end so-called prison gerrymandering, the practice of counting inmates as residents of the towns where they are incarcerated instead of where they came from.
The prior system was unfair, unjust, and undemocratic.
He also sponsored legislation taking aim at the NYPD's controversial stop and frisk program, banning the collection of personal information from those stopped but not charged with a crime.
He worked on the issue of stop and frisk before it was popular to do so.
In Congress, Jeffries teamed up with Georgia Republican Doug Collins in 2018 to pass sweeping reforms of the federal prison system. The First Step Act eased mandatory minimum federal sentences, expanded early releases, and ended some draconian practices, such as the shackling of women inmates giving birth.
He was even able to get one of the few bills through during the dark ages of the former president of the United States.
There have been some letdowns, too. Jeffries has so far been unable to pass into law a bill ending the sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine, a disparity that disproportionately harms Black Americans.
Jeffries also has struggled to corral enough support on Capitol Hill to ban police chokeholds, legislation he introduced after Eric Garner died while being arrested by the NYPD. Jeffries' ability to get things done will get even harder now that Republicans are the majority party in the House. Reflecting back, Jeffries says he was pleasantly surprised when Republicans joined in on the First Step Act and would like to see if they could now do more.
It's my hope that we can continue to lean into bipartisan negotiations as it relates to right-sizing our criminal justice system and making sure that we can elevate public safety.
He says he will work with Republicans when possible, but push back on what he labels extremism. Former Congressman Bob Goodlatte, a Republican, remembers working with Jeffries to modernize music copyright laws for the streaming age. Goodlatte says crafting the bill required balancing input from several competing parties.
One of the best skills a legislator can have is to be willing to communicate with anybody in a constructive way about how to get things done. And that's exactly the approach that he's taken.
Some Republicans now in Congress are skeptical of their ability to work with him.
I think the Democrats picked someone that's in line with their ideology up here. He's very far left.
Others, at least so far, are not entirely writing him off.
I have served with Hakeem Jeffries in the New York State Assembly. I've always found him to be a straight-up individual who is willing to listen and have a conversation. I hope he keeps that.
Maybe he is now. We would finally have a reasonable leader of the Democratic Party that wouldn't be so partisan, and maybe he is somebody we could work with. That remains to be seen.
Back in Brooklyn, Jeffries' constituents are counting on him to work for them.
We need someone like him to be able to bring something more to the community, which I think he can.
In Brooklyn, Kevin Fry, New York 1. It was the wee hours of a Saturday morning after days of delays when a long-standing House tradition finally played out. The minority leader passing the gavel to the newly elected speaker, kicking off the new Congress. But before handing it over to Republican Kevin McCarthy, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries first had someone he wanted to honor.
And without question in my mind, Speaker Emerita Pelosi will go down in history as the greatest speaker of all time.
Jeffries' elevation to top House Democrat is part of a generational shift for the party. Nancy Pelosi had already led Democrats for a decade when Jeffries entered Congress 10 years ago. Now, as he takes the reins, some who know him, like his first chief of staff, expect him to handle the job a bit differently than his long-tenured predecessor.
Her leadership style was more top-down, and I think Hakeem's will be more bottom-up and more inclusive, consensus-building, very deliberative, but yet decisive.
A New York Republican who has worked with Jeffries on legislation agrees.
I definitely think he will not be as top-down heavy. I think he's going to seek out input. I think he's going to surround himself with members that he trusts, that kind of dissipates some of the power.
As the incoming House Democratic leader,
Jeffries has already hinted at a collaborative approach. In the letter announcing his candidacy for Democratic leader, he promised to empower members of the caucus, ensuring everyone has an authentic seat at the legislative table. Here's what he said earlier this month.
As we go through this moment of transition, it will necessarily require a team effort across the House Democratic caucus, beyond the leadership individuals, in order to be able to take the baton.
Jeffries was the unanimous choice of House Democrats to lead them. But whether the caucus can stay unified in the long term is not yet clear. If Democrats win back the majority in 2 years, they will have the power to determine the House agenda, and there will likely be competing pressures from within the ranks to shape it, including from the party's left flank, with which Jeffries has at times had a complex relationship.
Is he progressive enough to appease the squad and members of the progressive end of the party?
There's going to be some fights. There's going to be some fights and some conversations, but that's what's supposed to happen, right? That's the point of democracy.
Congressman Jamal Bowman, a member of the so-called squad who is backed by the progressive organization Justice Democrats, is excitedly embracing his fellow New Yorkers' new job.
I've had many conversations with Hakeem around racial justice. We're on the same page there. Economic justice, we're on the same page. Universal child care, we're on the same page.
But others on the left are far more skeptical. Climate activists in the progressive Sunrise Movement condemn Jeffries for not joining other New York City congressional Democrats in signing on to the Green New Deal resolution. They question how highly he prioritizes the climate fight, even though the League of Conservation Voters gave Jeffries a lifetime score of 96% on their most recent National Environmental Scorecard. Some have criticized him for helping to launch a political action committee to support incumbents in primaries, seeing it as a swipe against progressive challengers.
I think that it would be beneficial for him to spend more time focusing on fighting Republicans than fighting those in his own party.
Jeffries has not shied away from pushing back, telling The Atlantic in 2021 that he would never bend the knee to hard-left democratic socialism.
You, of course, have gone after the left flank of the party multiple times.
Well, I wouldn't say that I've gone after the left flank of the party.
Okay.
When called upon to respond, I will at times not hesitate in responding, but it never is gratuitous in the first instance.
Former Congressman Tom Reed says that when ideological differences among Democrats emerge, Jeffries may have to rule with a heavy hand to force consensus, especially if margins in the House are tight.
He's going to maybe have to pivot back a little bit more to that top-down type of leadership, but time will tell.
As he's risen through the ranks, Jeffries' fundraising prowess has grown. As a House backbencher, but with token opposition, he regularly raised less than $2 million each campaign. That more than doubled after he became caucus chair. And in the last campaign cycle, Jeffries raised nearly $6 million. That still pales compared to Pelosi, who raised nearly $25 million ahead of the 2022 election. Now that he's in the top job, Jeffries' fundraising is likely to rise.
I expect that in 2024, we'll see all the chickens come home to roost and really his fundraising to become up with all of the people who have traditionally held these roles.
In the near future, one of Jeffries' main goals as Democratic leader is winning back control of the House in 2024. Democrats only need to flip a handful of seats, with many potential pickup opportunities back home in New York.
If successful, Jeffries would be poised to become House Speaker. But what about the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue? At least one Jeffries ally floats the possibility.
I don't think that there is any ceiling on Hakeem Jeffries.
Is that something you'd even entertain?
No.
No desire to be president?
My focus right now is doing the best job that I can in the position that I hold, making sure that we deliver results for the American people, implement our successful legislative agenda that comes out of the last Congress, work closely with President Biden, make sure he's reelected, and do everything we can to win back control of the House of Representatives in 2024.
But that's taking it off the table entirely?
Yes.
Now, the scripture says in Galatians...
Leading the House of Representatives one day, though, is very much on the table. Only 55 people have been Speaker since 1789. Jeffries would be the first person of color elected Speaker and the first representing a district in New York City, cementing a remarkable climb to power for a son of Brooklyn who won his first election just 16 years ago.